Well, our RCMP saying the quiet part out loud. Traditional Canadian values are now extreme. That is the words that came out of a spokesperson for the RCMP on the Quebec issue yesterday on the CBC. And it was, well, surprising, but also not surprising, if you get what I'm saying. It was kind of wild. So we'll be covering that, as well as the fallout from all that and what that means in terms of consequences for us in this country and what it means for people who happen to hold traditional values and what does that mean for us moving forward. I'm your host, Josh. Welcome to the Evaporating podcast. I'm so grateful to be back on with you yet again. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. Helps us to grow, helps us get to new audiences, and helps give people another option that's not the CBC shilling wild rhetoric. Anyways, let's get into our first story, shall we? So the CBC was interviewing a staff sergeant for the RCMP on the issue of what would happen with the Quebec City situation. If you don't know, if you haven't heard, there was about 4 people they tracked down who were allegedly planning to take over parts of Quebec City as an anti-government militia, quote unquote. Again, all alleged. We don't really know exactly what the motives are yet. However, they did uncover a stockpile of weapons and other types of ammunition that was of concern to the RCMP. And with this group, they said they're planning to take over territory around or in Quebec City to create their own society with their own values. And obviously, if any group were to do that, and if this is true, that's a concern. We don't like to see people just decide to take territory that is take territory by force. We don't want to see that in a civilized country. However, that is what they're saying happened here. Again, it's all alleged. We don't know the full story yet. We just know from what the RCMP has told us, and we only know what the CBC and others are reporting. So we're just, okay, we'll take it all with a grain of salt. We'll see what it actually is. But, however, if what they're reporting is true, it does mean something significant for us as Canadians. Reg and I discussed this on the show last night. The reason why I really didn't like how they were covering the story, because it didn't sit well with me, if I'm being quite frank. There was such a huge, stop the presses, this just happened. Some of these guys were actually active members of the Canadian Armed Forces, which I get. If it's someone who's working within a government authority or a government branch who's doing something like this, well, that can be spooky, 100%. But there was such a heavy precedent, heavy hand on covering the story, which other stories similar to this didn't get or haven't received. So that's the part I was like, I just don't like how, I don't mind this being reported. I think it's important for people to know what's going on with this and know what happened around Quebec City and people who are planning to do something like this. I think we need to know that. I think it's very important. We don't want to see our country toppled. However, the vibe around the story, I couldn't put my finger on it. I just didn't like it. And Reg made a good point on our live stream last night. He says the reason why this is getting such a hot button topic is because they want to make an example of these individuals. Because this topic and the reasons they say they did these things is a little too close to home, because a lot of Canadians are feeling this. Reg said you have Alberta who's on their way out. Quebec is on its way out. Newfoundland has kind of hinted at the idea of joining Confederation was a mistake. There's people who just want out of Canada right now. Not just physically, but just in terms of disassembling it altogether. So a story like this was a little too on the nose in terms of a lot of people feeling this way. So it needed to be covered heavily, it needed to be stamped out, and it needed to be made an example of. That's how we got where we are with this story and how they're covering it. So they had a staff sergeant come on the show and ask questions about what would happen, what were the details of the story, this, that, the other. And there's some points in this. There's 3 points specifically that I'm going to call out that I want to cover. First of which, about the alleged situation that these people wanted to seize land and start their own society.
What I can tell you is that in that ideology in general, quite often we would see a desire to create a new society, a desire to live by different values and wanting to change or create some kind of chaos so that they could take over society to create it and live it the way that they want.
We say here that, with that ideology, they would want to take over society. They want to create society on their own means. They want to take things over. They didn't say they actually wanted to go do that. However, they said with that ideology often comes these types of thoughts and processes. So again, the problem I'm having with the story already is they are reading in the motives of these people. I just want to know what the actual motives of these people are. I don't want to know the alleged motives. I don't want to know what the supposed motives are. I want to know the exact motives. And that's why I want journalists to do their job. right here, she's kind of leading with, often with these types of ideologies and these people have, what they showed on their Instagram, is that they are going to do X, Y, and Z things. That doesn't work for me. I want to know exactly what their motives are. I want to know exactly what they're thinking. I want a true story from top to bottom. I want the ugliness of it. I want the realness of it. I want the authenticity of it. I want to know the details. I don't want to know what the RCMP thinks could happen. I want to know what did happen and what does this mean for us moving forward. That's what I want to know. And the fact that this was highlighted the way that she highlighted it was of concern to me. The second thing I thought was fairly interesting was she talking about how these groups are very anti-authority. And that was of concern to the RCMP as well when they're looking into the story.
Any anticipation that there could be more charges laid here? Is there any anticipation that there could be more charges laid here?
Not in this case, but it's something, of course, that we are looking into. When we talk about anti-authority or anti-government issues, quite often it just happens that there's a profile of people that have a set of knowledge and skills that could help in putting something like that together. We can think of police officers also, or it could be a doctor if that's needed in that new society. So it's a possibility. It's everywhere. Like I mentioned, it's really a society issue. It's not something that's happening only in the armed forces. Being anti-authority in general is really something that we're seeing even in youth that have nothing to do with the army, but are not happy with what's happening around them.
You catch that? The sentiment of anti-authority, distrust in government, distrust in institutions is not just secluded to the armed forces, as this was the focus of the story. It's not just to the police or to what are traditionally, they didn't say it here, but traditionally are conservative valued organizations. People who make up these organizations have traditionally conservative values. Whether that's true today or not is a different story, but traditionally, that's what these things have. It breaks out just from there. The idea of anti-authority is across a whole society. And what she's saying is true, whether it be a far left view on it, where we need to break down the government, we can't trust the government, they don't have our best interests at heart, this, that, the other. Or it could be the traditional conservative people who are just like, I don't trust the liberal government. I don't trust what they've done. Look at what they've done to our country. But like, everyone has their own reasons for distrusting government, whether it be on the left side of the spectrum or on the right side of the spectrum. Everyone is feeling it. And she said so here. And it's also very popular amongst the youth, where we know that in our education systems, there's a specific ideology, there's a specific set of beliefs that are pushed in our school systems. So of course, it's the anti-authority approach is a little different coming from the youth these days than it is from other people who feel somewhat similar. The issue is everyone's reasonings are different in this country, but the end result is the same: is they do not trust the government, they do not trust our institutions, and they do not trust those in authority. And this was obviously of huge concern to the RCMP in this specific case. But then we get to the end of this video, the final question, the one that was probably the most eyebrow raising of them all. The question was asked, what should Canadians do to keep an eye out for our national security and making sure you're calling out extremism in your groups? And the answer to that was, well, fascinating.
And when you're finally, I wanted to ask, when you're talking about seeing individuals engage in that anti-authority and perhaps escalating their beliefs or their motives in that level, I'm wondering what the public can do in order to be vigilant, or what they can do to help in trying to ensure that there is safety and security on that front.
Well, radicalization in general quite often will show by people isolating themselves and changing their behavior, like changing what they're saying on a subject, like becoming more extremist. And if someone was very believed in equal gender rights, but all of a sudden are leaning towards like traditional values, and that might be a sign that they're becoming more extremist. But we also have to remember that having the most extremist views is perfectly legal in Canada, and that it's only acting with violence to prove that view that becomes a criminal offense.
Catch that? The way they stated that was really odd, wasn't it? When you have to keep an eye out for extremism, people become isolationists. They kind of pull away from everybody. They become kind of their own thing. And then she gives the example. If someone believes in an equal partnership in a relationship, and then they start saying that they want more traditional values, that's a sign of extremism. Okay. No, it's not. Like that is crazy. There's couples I know who are very much on the progressive side of things, saying that the man has equal part as the wife and they do all the same things, like that's how they work. And there's also couples I know where they very much go back to traditional values, where women stay in the home, they take care of the kids, they take care of the house, the man goes out and works, and that works for them. However, someone who holds those traditional values is now seen as extremist based on our RCMP. That's the story of today. They said the quiet part out loud. People who believe in traditional values are at risk of being extremists in the society that they're trying to build. Where does that go? Well, those who know history knows exactly where this goes. The minute they start trying to squelch behavior, change behavior, to make sure it aligns with the government ideology, it usually doesn't go very well after that. And quite frankly, it's not going to get any better. We've seen stories like this circulated constantly, one of which being gyms, for example, are now a hotbed for right-wing extremism these days because men are getting together and working on their bodies. We've seen those stories perpetuated by our media. And we've seen stories like this pushed and circulated in our society. Again, painting and starting to prep and prime the people to view specific behaviors as extreme, whether it be eating steak as another one of them, whether it be making decisions for themselves, whether it be being financially independent can be viewed as a form of extremism. We've seen stories pushed. And now seeing people in our RCMP saying those who hold traditional values could be seen as extreme. Keep an eye on them. And then try to save yourself a little bit saying, like having extremist values is not illegal, but acting on violence is illegal. My friend, having traditional values is simply not extreme. It's not. However, this distrust in government, the distrust in our institutions, well, you proved it right there why people don't trust you. You say something as stupid as that, and then you wonder why people are anti-authority. People don't trust the government, don't trust institutions because they keep trying to stamp all over them every chance that they get. We see stories like this where people really feel out of control. Or a man in Ontario who had immigrated here from India in his early 20s, was working for Bell and went to go hook up the internet for a female client. He went in there, hooked up the internet, and then flashed himself to the woman. Under our criminal code and what he was charged under would either go down two different paths. Either get 6 months in jail or less, or get 2 years in jail or less. And do you know what they gave him? 90 days probation, because it might have hurt his opportunities to be able to stay in Canada, and that he could likely get deported if he had gone to jail for doing what he had done. So for a normal Canadian, you'd be going to jail. But because this is tied to your immigration status, 90 days of probation and community service. And you wonder why people don't trust the institutions or the government because it's no longer working the way it needs to. Rules for thee and not for me, or whatever the government deems as important at the time. We have the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is an organization that does polls around the globe, keying in on trust factors for citizens in various countries. They aim to measure the level of trust that the general population has in 4 key institutions: business, government, non-governmental organizations, and media. There's some things that came out in the 2025 report that we see here that are fairly interesting. Right now, at this point, and those who are surveyed say 1 in 5 Canadians believe that the next generation is better off. Only 1 in 5 Canadians believe that now. Something even more interesting is that nearly 7 in 10 young adults in Canada see hostile activism as a viable means to drive change. When they put out the poll, you had people selecting at least one of these 4 options down here. They approve of hostile activism, which includes attacking people online, intentionally spreading disinformation, threatening or committing violence, or damaging public or private property in order to drive change. 7 in 10 young people believe that is the way to go now. Hostile activism is the way to go. But we're going to have this whole highlighted piece on these 4 guys in Quebec, which I do think is important. It should be covered. But give honest coverage across the spectrum, shall we? Fear that leaders lie to us is at an all-time high here in Canada. So 67% in Canada believe and worry that government leaders lie to them purposely. 67%. 66% believe that in business leaders, and 62% believe that about journalists and reporters. Our trust is completely evaporating in all levels in this country. Sure, you can make an example of these 4 guys in Quebec, but it's happening across the country. And so when you get on the CBC and say that having traditional values is a sign of extremism, that right there shows exactly why things have gotten so bad in this country. People are done being lectured and lied to and gaslit by our government authorities. But anyways, have yourselves a good one. I'm out.